Hi, Kunal. Thanks so much for joining me for our Tractor Founder Fuel series today. Really great to have you on and talk to you about Eugene Labs and your journey. So, yeah, thanks for being here and tell us about you and Eugene Labs.
Yeah, thanks for having me and tell you a little bit more about myself. So I was born in Dubai. I grew up in a very Indian, traditional Indian family, and moved to the US when I was 16 and studied accounting and finance like a good Indian boy at university. Did that for a couple of years after graduation and realized that it was absolutely not for me. And so started my first company at 23 and have been in the entrepreneurial startup tech space ever since. Taught myself how to design, taught myself product, taught myself code, and sort of broadened my overall capability and capacity within this startup and tech space. And then after my second company, I really wanted to work on something that was going to add value to society. And it just so happened that around then my dad had suddenly passed away from a sudden heart attack, and it really opened my eyes to the sheer inadequacies and disparities that exist within the healthcare system. And so living in this world where we can use technology to make life easier in so many different ways, like ordering a light bulb from the internet and having it delivered in under 2 hours, or ordering a taxi and it just rocking up on your door. Well, these days they don't even need to have drivers in them, and yet decent healthcare still seems to be so far out of reach for so many people. It just didn't make any sense. It was a bit of a cognitive dissonance for me, where we're investing so much time and energy into making these simple things easier, but this really, really important thing still remains so complicated and difficult to access. And so really wanted to work on something in healthcare to make especially preventative healthcare a lot more easy. Was fascinated by the power and potential of genomics as a tool to predict and prevent health issues before they happen, and really spent a lot of time diving deep into that space. And yeah, there were just a few things that kept coming up where uh, the global genomic research only includes people of North European ancestry, 82% of global genomic studies, which is 7% of people representing 82% of the data, and 93% of the people representing 19% of the, or 18% of the data. It's just, there was just so many of these things that came up where I was like, well, this seems like a really chunky problem, and I love a good chunky problem. And I started to unpick as to why that existed. And it kept coming down to access to services and access to care. So most people don't really get a genetic test because they don't really have access to the clinical support they need to be able to understand what that actually means and then take action in their life or within a clinical setting. And that's when I met my co-founder Zoe, who's a genetic counselor who kind of arrived at the same conclusion from a very different world. She was obviously dealing with patients on a day-to-day basis and dealing with individuals who maybe had a child that wasn't meeting a developmental milestone or had been diagnosed with something and have to contend with this, with the knowledge that this same technology could have been applied 5 years ago, and they would have been able to have predicted that issue and possibly prevented it. And so we both came to this conclusion that, wow, this is a really powerful technology that can predict and prevent issues, but most people aren't accessing it because they don't have access to clinical care. And so we started Eugene together, and our purpose was really to make preventative genomics accessible to all. That is, this information is within our DNA to be able to predict and prevent health issues, and we just want to make it more accessible to everyone.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's our
amazing.
story.
That's amazing. And I imagine not only access, but actually education, like knowing that this is, you can be proactive with this stuff. And I'm guessing the cost savings for the health system is enormous as well if you're proactively mitigating against this.
Absolutely.
Mm.
100%. Like the cost savings for the health system, they passed the landmark coverage for carrier screening, which is a reproductive health test to help people understand if they have a higher chance of having a child with a serious genetic condition like cystic fibrosis or spinal muscular atrophy. And these conditions have a really high cost to the health
Mm.
system should a child be born. And now Medicare covers that test because they see the value and
Yes.
benefit in having a population screen for that.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. So that's all on movement towards your cause. That's fantastic. And so tell me, I'm curious about how you've funded Eugene Labs from the start and how you think about funding.
Yeah, I would be honest to say how I think about funding has evolved over time.
Yep.
And Yeah, I guess that's true for probably everyone.
Yeah.
But when we first started, and for the first few years of the company's journey, we definitely raised from, well, we started raising from angel investors and we graduated, if you will, to raising from funds. And we've got a couple of VC funds on our cap table. And as time has passed, we've started to evolve our thinking around fundraising altogether. And we've obviously taken money from Tractor as well. And part of that has been, in the past, has been to bridge gap to reaching a couple of milestones so we can raise around.
Yep.
These days, it's more about we're generating enough revenue and are very close to reaching this profitability state point, and we want to be able to achieve that before we go out and do a big raise or a next big raise.
Yep.
And so using loan financing in this way to be able to extend the runway and reach certain milestones and be able to effectively unshackle ourselves from this cycle where you need to raise money, and that just causes more dilution and that just causes less stake in the business for you. And it's a very expensive way to be effectively just funding the business's ongoing operations. And so, yeah, I think these days I think about it more as if we can access loan capital to be able to get to our milestone, why wouldn't I choose that over VC capital unless the VC capital is coming with some very specific benefits?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. Like it does evolve over time. And I guess, and we hear this a lot from founders that we work with. You've got to a point now where you've got some real confidence that you've got definitely a proven product market fit. You're nearly at profitability. Now you're like, I want to protect what I built here, not give it all away. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and also the timing factor too. I'm guessing doing a raise doesn't just happen in a week.
Totally. Yeah, it takes up so much time. And on the timing front as well, timing for the business as well is pretty important. So genomics is an interesting space because since we started, there's been a lot of upheaval. And so as a result of an upheaval in the lab space, upheaval in the public markets in genomics, and that's kind of created variable perspectives on the space as well from a VC point of view. And so, what the value of the business is and what it can be. But the current trend in market for the industry that you're in is on a downswing. If you're going in the VC path, your valuations go alongside that downswing. But if you're sort of using alternative models of capital, then you're not really as affected by it. And I think that's been a big shift. So we're seeing now with the longevity space, suddenly there's all this interest coming back. We're back in the upswing, and
Yeah,
now you're seeing high valuations. But there was that middle period for a few years where digital health valuations were dipping. On top of that, in our space around preventative health and genomics, huge dips. And so getting caught up in that cycle, try
yeah.
to avoid that cycle and being mindful of the timing of when you raise, which is like I want to raise when the cycle's on the upswing, not on the
Yeah,
downswing.
that's
Yeah.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And that's the whole reason we exist at Tractor, to provide that alternative type of capital so you can maximize your valuations. Well, can we switch now to, we love talking about leadership and management, and I think it's really useful for our listeners to hear how founders like yourself, what's your go-to, what's your tip on managing people or just leading in your space?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's also a tough question because I guess there's just so many little things
There
that fall. Yeah,
are. We
there's
could
so many
talk,
things
we
that
could
kind
talk
of
for hours
fall.
just on this topic.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So I think that for me, one of the biggest things has been to do two things. One is to understand who I am and how I operate
Mhm.
and how I like to operate. And that kind of requires a good amount of self-awareness, but then converting that self-awareness into action where you want to be able to tell people, hey, this is who I am and this is how I operate, and here's how I want you to communicate with me. Here's how I will communicate with you. And this is how we can form a cohesive and collaborative working relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And I
love
think a lot of people do that well. I think the challenge is often in sticking to that. So on a day-to-day basis, there's all kinds of stuff happening, maybe in what both at work and your personal life. Maybe you've slept well, maybe you haven't slept well, maybe you've been exercising and you're feeling good, and maybe you haven't and you're feeling shit.
Yeah.
Apologies. I think that, or there's something going on in your personal life, or work's really stressful, which it often is,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're not able to actually respond to people in the way that you say you would respond, probably because you're not in your flow state or whatever, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I think that for me, that is probably the most important tip. So you do that first part, which is have that self-awareness and be able to communicate that with people. But then the second part is to organize your life in a way that you can consistently show up as the person that you say you are.
Yeah, wow. And so I love that. I love authentic leadership and that self-awareness piece. It's hugely important. What are some of the practices that keep you in that flow state that you use?
Already probably hinted at them. Exercise, sleep, and it's just this is the two biggest things. Nutrition, I'm a bit of a longevity nut, so all of those things are
Yeah,
really, really important. I also think it's accepting that you won't always be that way,
yeah,
and then communicating back to that person, be like, hey, so yesterday I didn't do what I say I would do, and I acknowledge that, and I'll try turning that back on
yeah,
so that the other person knows as well and
yeah,
appreciates you're a human being. You're not always going to show up. But if you show up 98% of the time or 95% of the time, that's pretty good SLAs, I'd say.
yeah.
And I think that's all anyone can ask for.
Exactly.
And people are quite accepting of the 5% or the 3% or whatever that percentage is if you acknowledge it and they see you acknowledge it. And it also helps them then be able to show up in that way.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
when you can say, I'm really sorry, I was in bad form, then they stop internalizing it themselves, right? Because they're probably thinking, what have I done wrong? Or they start
Yeah,
questioning themselves. So it's, yeah, just puts them at ease when you can do that.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Thanks, Canal. Really, really great tips and so great what you're doing. And yeah, it's awesome. We love being on the journey with you. And yeah, it's so great for everyone that you're helping. So I really appreciate you coming on and spending the time. And yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. And
No
yeah,
worries.
have an awesome day.